Welcome back to the CTO Playbook, the podcast dedicated to helping CTOs excel. Now, what if the biggest thing limiting your engineering impact isn't talent, funding, or technology, but a single assumption that you rarely question? In this episode, we're looking at something deceptively simple, the definition of done, not as a delivery artifact, but as a leadership tool. I'll share a story from my coaching work where busy teams, full backlogs, and constant motion masked a deeper problem. Work that was nearly done, but never truly finished. And we'll unpack why redefining done can quietly transform ownership, focus, and business impact. I'm Adam Horner, coach to CTOs from startups to enterprises, helping you lead with the clarity, confidence, and strategic impact you need. If you feel like you're figuring it out the hard way, you aren't alone. That's why I created the CTO Playbook, a podcast and platform built for tech leaders just like you. Explore coaching, cohorts, and how you can stay up to date at thectoplaybook.com, helping you build your own playbook for your path at your pace. Now, let me start with a situation that I see more often than I'd like to. A CTO I was coaching a while back genuinely believed he was doing a good job. And to be fair to him, on the surface, it looked that way. His teams were busy, stand-ups were full, backlogs were overflowing, there were projects everywhere. From the outside, it looked like momentum. But when we slowed down and actually looked at what was happening, a very different picture emerged. They had more work in progress than engineers. Nearly everything was nearly done. Features were half built, half tested, half integrated, and ideas took an extraordinarily long time to reach production, if they ever did. The business was frustrated, the product team were frustrated, and quietly, though not always silently, the engineers were frustrated too. They were working hard, but they weren't finishing. And that's where the real problem lived. Because a CTO's real job isn't to start projects, it's to create business impact. And that requires finishing. What this organization was experiencing wasn't a lack of effort or talent or even intent. It was the absence of a clear, shared, operational definition of done. And here's the mental model I want to use today. Think about basketball. In basketball, done is not when a player launches a three-point shot from the arc. It's not even when the ball passes through the net. Done is when the points go on the board, the referee has not called a foul, and the team has reset, ready for the next play. Until then, the game hasn't moved forward. Engineering work is almost exactly the same. Writing code is like the shot. Merging a branch is the ball going through the net. But business impact only happens when the points are on the board, when users are using it, when telemetry is flowing, when the organization has absorbed the change and got ready to move on. And yet, many teams behave as though the shot itself is the win. And this is why teams feel busy but don't feel effective, because they're optimizing for activity rather than for outcomes. So when we looked closely at that organization, a few things stood out immediately. First, time to production was painfully long. Not because the work was hard, but because it was fragmented. Second, work in progress was out of control. Each engineer was running their own mini projects, multiple of them simultaneously. And third, ownership was diluted. Once something was nearly done, attention drifted on to the next shiny thing. And finally, fulfillment was low. Engineers did not get that satisfaction of finishing. The business didn't get the confidence of delivery, and so we changed one thing first. We stopped talking about what people were working on and started talking about what people needed to get done. And crucially, what done actually meant. Now, let me pause you here for a moment, because if you listen to this while walking, commuting, or between meetings, just hold this question. Otherwise, I encourage you to write this down. What would you expect to happen if in your teams, if nothing was allowed to start until something else was fully done? Not merged, not nearly finished, but done, in the sense that the scoreboard has moved. What reactions does that question bring up for you? If you're feeling discomfort, it's usually a sign that you're close to something important. Now, let's return to our CTO story from earlier. Now, with that CTO, we didn't start by adding more process. Like most CTOs, he believed he was managing delivery just fine. But he was actually standing courtside, watching shots, and assuming that the score must be going up. But if we don't explicitly define what counts as a point and keep an eye on the scoreboard, we're not leading the game, we're just watching motion. So we started by expanding the definition of done. Instead of the change is done when the code is complete, we moved to the change is done when it is in production and users are generating new telemetry as a result. Now that shift began to change everything because now work had to be designed with outcomes in mind. Engineers, they stayed attached to their work for longer, and ownership didn't evaporate at merge time. In basketball terms, we stopped celebrating the shot and started caring about the scoreboard and what the changes were on there. And something interesting happened because work now had a clearer end. It became easy to split projects across engineers rather than each person own their own never-ending stream of half-finished initiatives. Fewer projects, more focus, and faster completion. The flow improved, not because people worked harder, but because they finished. Now let's talk about one of my biggest bugbears. A weak definition of done quietly destroys ownership. When done is vague, responsibility kind of just dissolves. When done is clear, accountability becomes natural. And there's a phrase I love, and it reads like it was written by Yoda. It is done or it is not done. There is no nearly. Just say that once to yourself. Say it once to your team and let it land, because nearly done is where projects go to die. People mentally move on before the work is finished. Attention shifts, energy drops, and that's when the last 10% starts taking the other 90% of the time. Not because it's technically hard, but because no one owns it anymore. Now, I want to offer a bit of a counterpoint because this updated my own thinking. I once worked with a client whose definition of done was, frankly, very short. Done meant the code is complete. That's it. No production requirement, no user telemetry, no operational ownership, no metrics. By my usual standards, it felt dangerously incomplete. But the important point was that they had defined it and defined it clearly, crystal clearly. And because of that, the team had also built explicit handoff roles. They'd built separate teams responsible for what happened next. And they had narrow but really well understood scopes of ownership. Was it perfect? No. Was it efficient? Actually, moderately. And crucially, it worked far better than organizations with no definition of done. And that was what surprised me. And there's a lesson in there. A well-defined but narrow definition of done will outperform no definition of done every time, because I've seen it multiple times now. The gold standard is a stretch definition, but clarity beats ambition without execution. So here's another question for you. What would you expect to happen in your organization if every project, every feature, every ticket had a single explicit owner until it was truly done? Not started, not merged, but done. Where do you think the resistance would show up? And what do you think that resistance would tell you? And this is also where CEOs can, and I believe should, hold CTOs to account. Because there's a few deceptively simple questions that a CEO can ask that will surface this challenge immediately. 1, how many things are in progress right now? Any number that's greater than the number of engineers? Red flag. Ask more questions. Question 2, what does done actually mean for this particular initiative? Do they stumble getting to the answer? Do they go look it up? Do they mumble it? Do they have a different definition from somebody else? All red flags. Number 3, how will we know this worked once it's live? Again, mumbling, stumbling, and unclear answers are a red flag to look into. You see, if those questions produce vague answers, you've found a gap. Not a capability gap, but a definition gap. One that can easily be closed and will make a big difference. So let's round this up then with a practical playbook that you can use this week. Definition of done. Number 1, document it. Write it down, share it, make it visible, include at least one example. And it's not just a definition of done, it's a process for definition of done. How do you define it? What does a good definition of done look like? What does a poor definition of done look like? Step 2, tie done to outcomes. The production behavior, the user telemetry, measurable change, not just the code. Number 3, limit the amount of work in progress explicitly so that you've got fewer projects and more focusing on finishing. Protect that focus. A work in progress limit or a WIP limit is something that I've seen work very effectively, but on its own, it doesn't help. A WIP limit works best in combination with the definition of done. Assign ownership until things are done. Create an accountable owner until the scoreboard has moved. And then finally, review what gets celebrated. Because if you're rewarding starting, you will get more starting. If you reward finishing, you'll get more impact. Now, great CTOs don't create motion, they create momentum. And momentum only happens when work finishes cleanly, clearly, and deliberately. A strong definition of done isn't process theatre, it's leadership. It's how you turn effort into impact, activity into outcomes, and busy teams into effective ones. And that's the work. And it's worth doing properly. So here's the question I'd like to leave you with. What does your current definition of done say about the kind of CTO you are and the kind of organization that you're building? Because leadership shows up in the smallest definitions, not just the biggest decisions. Now, if this episode has prompted you to rethink what done really means in your context, you can explore more at thectoplaybook.com. And if you'd like to talk about redefining it in a way that fits your business, your teams, and your stage of growth, feel free to reach out. Let's have a chat. Keep leading with impact. I'll see you next time. Thank you for listening to the whole episode. I appreciate your time. So just before you go, I'd like to ask you for a favor in return for putting together this episode of the CTO Playbook for you. Please share the episode with just one person who will appreciate it. Wherever you're listening, whether that is Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, or another platform, sharing the episode will help more CTOs find the podcast and enable me to create more great content. Remember that you can find more information on thectoplaybook.com. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you on the next episode of the CTO Playbook.